Morning. Hope you all have had your coffee, but I'll be brief, and this will be much lighter content that you've seen previously this week. So my name is Chris Beggio, and I work for Sandia National Laboratories, and I represent a small part of the user community. And by users, I'm referring to kind of consumers of the hardware and software that you all are responsible for. And I also represent, my users who are consumers principally of the software stacks, so they can write and run applications on these machines. As you all know, we were principally responsible for creating this community, almost 20 years ago. I guess we're important because, we occasionally buy very large systems and run them to the absolute edge all the time. So we're very good at finding, issues and problems and areas for improvement for performance. So last night we had a discussion among many of the users, and that was representative of kind of both commercial and government sectors, right? We have banking and finance, scientific laboratories for the Office of Science, as well as the DOE or NNSA complex, the weapons program. So that represents, very different users, but all of us pushing these systems to the edge for different results, right? So this is a synopsis of me trying to take notes from 20 different people, sometimes talking at once, and I tried to organize these in some sensible manner. So we'll go through some of these, and hopefully we can arrive at some calls for action for us as users and for you as kind of producers of hardware and software, and some areas where we have common ground and some areas for improvement. And these are by no means, disparaging of you as producers, right? I'm always in awe of this group and everything that you produce. We just hope that you continue to do that in the excellent manner that you have. So some of the big things that are happening for us as users, right? There's a lot of changes that are going on. OmniPath has created, somewhat of a challenge for us in that now we have, potentially, parts of the software stack have changed. We have different tools, and we always like to unify things to the degree that we can to simplify operations and deployment and ongoing support of these systems. High-speed Ethernet is always disruptive, and I'll go into that a little bit later. So challenges for us that were addressed, include the common lack of an upstream, code base in the Linux kernel, and this goes back to the very beginning. This is not new. This is certainly not news, but because of this, we have kind of many sources to obtain the software, and it comes in different forms, right? We have customers, or you have customers that build OFED from source for a variety of reasons. Some of the bits are included in the major distributions. There's OFED and MOFED, and this creates a bit of confusion for us as consumers. Well, where do we get the software, first of all, to solve our problems, and then where do we go to request changes, report bugs, etc. In contrast, right, so in the Lustre community, right, there's a fairly well-known and well-used Jira, and then of course there's the kernel.org Bugzilla, which is fairly centralized. That's not to say that that's perfect, but it's an example of how that's a little bit more organized than what we have as consumers of the InfiniBand stack, or OpenFabrics, to be clear. So again, the issues for us to both report and to find solutions are scattered across, OFED, MoFed, the kernel.org, and then the various distributions, SLES, Red Hat, and their kind of bug reporting and feature reporting mechanisms. So there is an OpenFabrics Wiki, which is maybe a good first step for, or one of the first steps for consumers of the software or these various software stacks. And I actually have this. I have this link up here twice, not to be confusing. I just didn't realize I'd put it up there once already. But also, the upstream kernel wiki is a good first source to track issues and to report them. However, it may not be where ultimately the solution is committed, right? So one of the things that's been helpful, Red Hat, for instance, has been using more up-to-date kernels, which is helpful for bugs that have been or updates that have been committed to kernel.org. But Red Hat, as opposed to OFED, does not backport. So backporting is useful for us in OFED. It's a bit of a challenge when fixes are not backported, because we tend to, unfortunately, stay on distributions much longer than we should, many cases, just because of the difficulty in performing wide-scale updates, and then also for security reasons, right? We have to do a lot of vetting and verification. So that's one thing that was identified. So more from a business perspective, switching gears here a little bit, OFA in recent years has become more vendor-driven than customer-driven, and that's not a disparaging remark against the community. We're as responsible for that as anyone, as consumers. We need to be more engaged and make our requirements known, and also affect that change ourselves. And I'll discuss why that's challenging here in a minute. So one of the things that's happened since the inception of the organization is that we now have this concept of promoting members, where we pay dues and we have a seat on the board, and that might not be the best mechanism for affecting change, especially when board members don't contribute to the degree that they should. And there's in the open source communities, there's a pretty strong debate versus paid members having influence versus actual community contributors having influence. And I think we should probably, as a community, revisit giving more voice to strong contributors to the code base, right? Having influence based on number of commits or the strength of those commits, whatever that is. So that's probably something that we should revisit to. Again, we want to promote a better product, and that might be one way to do that. So how do we get more contribution to the community? That's maybe more of a call to action than me pontificating up here. I definitely think that we as members need to contribute more, but it's a fairly difficult process, and the next bullet kind of explains or keys into why. Part of my job description is not to write code for this code base, and so it's very hard for me, for instance, to create this code and go through the process of having it reviewed and approved, and then submitted to the community. It's a very long and difficult process. That's not to say that we shouldn't be doing it, but that's not just my organization, right? That's across kind of government entities. So that's something that we as consumers have to address and have to resolve if we're going to be stronger contributors to this open source community. So, you know, laboratories have been promoters since the inception, but the stack is you know, fundamentally different than it was at that time, and it's now becoming much more different as a result of OmniPath and other fabrics. And then here at the bottom, you know, there's always high-speed Ethernet as an alternative to InfiniBand, and this is driven largely by you know, OpenStack communities and those kinds of technologies, where, you know, we're willing to accept the trade-off for possibly a less agile stack at the expense of, you know, more latency and you know, lower throughput sometimes, but at more rapid deployment, right? These industries are all about kind of standing up systems very fast and getting results very quickly. We still love InfiniBand and high-speed, low-latency fabrics, but this is always kind of a disruption in our decision process. So, OFED not being a standard part of the distributions is a big challenge for us. You know, we realized why this was done early on. It was kind of at our request. You know, we didn't want to be vendor bound, right? We didn't want to be locked to any vendors. So, so as a result, this community and this code base was created. But we think, as you know, more standardization would probably benefit us and benefit the community as a whole, much like, you know, things like Ethernet, for instance. So again, you know, we're very good at finding all of the edge and corner cases, right? We push everything to the limit, and so, you know, and to make things more challenging, we want everything, you know, free, instantaneous, right, and perfect, right? That's all you have to deliver. So, so we struggle a lot with errors and kind of troubleshooting. This is not new, right? We've always kind of struggled with you know, subnet manager errors as an example, and Hal has done, you know, a lot of work at kind of educating us on this topic and kind of making those errors more kind of easier to read and to parse. But you know, one of the jokes last night was, you know, which of our organizations has, you know, not come up with a parser for these kinds of errors, right? We all have to do that. And that's largely because, you know, the text is sometimes kind of mysterious, the sources are indeterminate, and the severity is not hierarchical. So, so that's a challenge for us. It's something that we kind of have to do as consumers a lot to make the product more usable for us and to minimize kind of downtime and performance reduction. Documentation is always challenging, and again, one thing that Ira brought up was, you know, if you find a problem, you should, you know, try to solve it and document the result and make that available for everyone else, because it's very possible, again, because we're the, you know, often the first kind of discoverers of these problems. We might be the ones that find the resolution, and not to wait for, you know, someone else to report the problem or expect that somebody else has. We very frequently may be the first to find it and the first to resolve it. So so we always like to have better documentation, but again, there's some work incumbent upon us to make that available as well. And so to follow that, there's, this is a good opportunity for, for Wiki articles. And again, there's the link to the OpenFabrics Wiki, which not everyone is aware of. We need to do a better job of not keeping that information so close to the chest, and make sure that it's available for the community that we benefit from. And then again, this is in the same vein. Communicate the existence of and function of the mailing list, and there's a link there to the mailing lists on the OpenFabrics site, which again, maybe not be very well known by the user community. So again, who is the user community? How do we communicate this, right? So we discussed some ways in which we might kind of capture and then communicate without spam. The existence of these various repositories for knowledge. One possibility was, capturing, submissions at the Git repository in OpenFabrics. Another one is, post to the wiki perhaps, but we need to do and this is again challenged by the kind of disparity of the source of the stack, right? There's not one single source for it, so it's almost impossible to know who the community is by, for instance, who is using MoFed or who's using OFED or who downloads a source, right? We have to do a better job of kind of going out and possibly soliciting, who is using the software, who do we need to reach out to, both to provide information to and to collect information from, as potential sources for how to improve the products, what the requirements are, what problems they found, increase performance, all of those things. So, and then another possibility was include the link to the user community on the OpenFabrics site when the init script is run in IB Core, for instance. That's just one possibility. And then the final call to action, do we, as the user community, create, participate in, and continue a user working group? And I say all three of those things because they're all important, right? It's not enough just to create it, right? It's a commitment upon it, for us to make sure that it lives and kind of accomplishes our goals, which is to communicate to you what our requirements are, and kind of make sure that we get what we need in terms of getting those requirements met. So that's what I had. Susan, anything to contribute? Any questions? Feedback? Yeah, so of those in the room, and for those who are representative of others who may not be in the room, which organizations would be interested in attending a conference call to discuss the creation of this user group?
Before you take a vote, I'm not sure people know what a working group is, and therefore, are we trying to crush this spirit with administrative nonsense? And the answer is no, we aren't. The working group is really as much or as little as you want it to be. There is a process you have to go through so the working group can be formed and recognized by the board, but it's fairly lightweight. We had experience Paul had recently in setting up a working group, and I think he found more things happen more quickly than would have been possible otherwise, but for the working group. The other thing I want to just state, if I may, on behalf of OpenFabrics is change is welcome. This is absolutely wonderful news that you're giving us. This is some of the most important, potentially new direction we've gotten in a very long time. So I can't tell you how welcome this is going to be coming into us. So I want to be sure people knew you weren't signing up for long minutes and boring meetings and complicated things. It also, a working group gives you a chance to report routinely and conveniently into the board meetings, so you can make your voice known as often and in whatever form you want.
And Susan and I are both committed to this. I'm raising my hand.
I'm raising my
well,
hand.
so.
Yeah, just to add to that, for a while we had like a monthly, actually it wasn't even monthly, it was whenever people could get together. There was a group of us who had written our own monitoring tools to take care of the fabric and maintain it and see what it looked like. And we would get together, maybe it was Pasha who actually sponsored it, in the sense that we used their Blue Jean product or whatever it is to do like WebExes, where people would present, well, this is what my monitoring scheme looks like, here's how we use it, here's what it does for us. And it was like every Thursday or every other Thursday for a while, as we had people willing to present what they had. So that's more what this would look like, and it would morph as we go along, just once a month or once a quarter. Just at least it would be an opportunity for users or administrators to get together and talk about what they're experiencing in all aspects of the OpenFabrics stuff. So very low key, just maybe a mailing list and a conference call on some granularity of time. That's all we're talking about at this time.
Mr. Chair, can your vice chair have permission to go off reservation for a minute or two? Just to emphasize how important this is. This has actually been a topic of ongoing conversation at the board level. And just to emphasize how significant that conversation is, the conversation right now is about changing the OFA's governance structure exactly in response to this, to be sure that there is an opportunity for those who are not promoters to drive the organization in a useful way. That was the first comment. The second comment is, who is the community, was a question that you asked there. I can think of no better way in my mind to give a community a body than to create a working group. I think it's a wonderful approach, so please do it.
Thank you very much.